Hi, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to show you a family board game by the name of Legends. And in this game, players are going to be playing, I think, late 18th century, early 19th century explorers who are going to go trekking the globe looking for information on some legendary spaces, so such as the Yeti or King Arthur's sword or Shangri-La. And this is a game that plays in about 60 minutes for 2 to 4 players. The box says ages 9 and up. The game is essentially going to be about collecting different sets of cards and then playing them so that they will be scored in the various locations on the board. It has a unique time mechanism where players who have spent the least amount of time will go next in turn order, which means that sometimes players will get successive turns, and sometimes players who take big turns will have to wait a while before theirs. So I'll take a minute to show you how the game plays out, and then I'll come back and give you my thoughts on it. Here's a setup for a 2-player game of Legends, and the game will play up to 4. You'll notice that around the outside of the board there is a track, and this is going to be a time track, both functioning as a game timer and also a round or a player order timer. Essentially, each action that you're going to consume is going to take time. Once all players are past 75, the game will end. The player who's furthest behind on the track will always be the next player in turn order. Players will also have pawns, which will start here at this space. This is the Adventurers Club, and they'll travel out to different legendary sites, which they will be able to explore. The players who do the best at investigating each of these sites will potentially score points during scoring rounds, and the player with the most points at the end of the 75 weeks will be the winner. So these legendary sites, this is like, for example, a Yeti, and here's an Egyptian tomb, here's the Lost Ark, an elephant pyramid, or an elephant graveyard rather. This must be Shangri-La over here. So these are the various things that the players will be visiting over the course of the game. I should note there's also a score track, which is on another board. So at the start of the game, players will each get dealt a number of cards depending on their place in turn order, and then they will put 2 of those cards in secret into the Adventurers Club, and this will determine which areas get scored at the end of the round. So they also have, as you can see down here, essentially a player marker, which just really marks their color and gives them a space to hold their scoring markers. They'll start with 6 of those. One of them they get to place in an area on a 3 space. Here and here, the players have already done that. The other 5 they get to place during the course of the game. You'll note that there are 8 potential scoring areas, but you only get 6 scoring markers, so you cannot score in every area. You'll also have, like I said, some other cards which you do not place into the Adventurers Club at the start of the game, and these you'll be able to spend freely. So on a player's turn, so let's say white is beginning first, they will get to perform a movement and then act an action in an area. So the costs for the actions are printed on the board, and the costs for the movements are always going to be 1 space per track with an hourglass that you cross. So if I wanted to go here, that would take 2 movement, for example. So, and let's say that player does want to go to that space, that'd be fine. So actually this would be a great space for them to go to. So let's say they go down here, 1, 2, and in a given location, you can either perform the card action there, or you could perform research to advance your book along the track. So the way that that works is this player is not going to do the card action, they're going to perform research. You could turn in any number of cards with either the symbol matching the color of the space where you're on, so this is 2 yellow books essentially, or you could use these wild ones. Otherwise, all the cards just have, either 1 or 2 symbols of a given color. Those are the only types of cards in the game. So this player, by spending 2 books, would be able to move up. You see the cost here from 3 to 5 on this track. Here indicates the number of points that you would get on that if that location was scored during a scoring round. So that would get discarded out. And again, they spent 1, 2, and to advance that would be 2. So 3, 4 times. So they would just go up 4 spaces on the track. Actually, I misspoke. That would take 3 time because it's per card, not per symbol. So they spent 1 card and moved 2 spaces. That would take 3 times for that action. Now it would be the Browns player's turn because they're the furthest back on the turn track. And given these cards, and given I know that they put in a green and a gray card into the display, they probably would want to travel perhaps down here. So that would be 1, 2 to move, and then they perform an action here, and here they want to do this action here, which it costs 4 time, but allows them to take 3 cards from this display. So they would spend the 4 time, and they could take 3 cards, so they would probably take this double green, they'd probably take this double gray, and they'd probably take this wild. And after that, that would be their turn, and now that will be refilled. I'll look at even more green and more gray. All right, so it should be noted that you can never perform an action in a space where you just were, so this player would be forced to move. Also, if ever you go to a space where another player is, you have to give them a card as a penalty for being in an occupied space. And if there's more than one player in that space, you'll have to pay more than 1 card penalty. So now we'll go back to White's turn. So on White's turn, they may decide they want to travel here to Shangri-La for a cost of 1 movement, and then play these 2 cards to place a book. You notice the cost is 2 to place your book initially onto that track, and that would move them on top of the brown player. And since they're on top of the brown player, they would then get to play again immediately. If players are tied for the last space, whoever's on top is the next player. So they would get to go again. So this is going to keep going back and forth. Something that I should note is that if ever, let's say brown moved to this space and they placed their book on the same space where white was, it would get booted back and off the board potentially. So for example, if white was here and brown played 3 red symbols to move onto the red space, then the white would just slide back here. But again, if somebody moves on top of it while it's already on the furthest space back, it would go out of the back and get returned to the player actually. So there we go. So just to explain that, so the white player played 2 symbols, they're there. So this is just going to keep going back and forth until these players are going to proceed to here. Let's say that white moves on to here. The first player to hit or exceed the 25, which is where the first scoring is. Their scorings at 25, 45, 60, and 75. The first player to do that gets this golden chalice, which they'll then be able to immediately place into one of the areas. So let's say they put it into this yellow area, and that means that area will definitely get scored during the next scoring phase. Then as soon as the last player gets to the silver chalice, that will trigger a scoring. And the way that that's going to work is, I assume that there would have been cards placed in here by the adventurers, because one of the actions that you could do is to come back here to the adventurers club, and you spend 1 to 3 actions to place 1 to 3 cards into this pile, and then you get to draw 1 card. So again, by placing cards into there, you're going to be influencing what areas get scored. Then for the scoring, you're going to flip cards up until you have 5 different colors showing. So here we have 3. So there are 4. I'm out of cards, so you'd stop there. And then each of these areas would get scored, plus any area that has the golden chalice in it. So here we would score the green area. Green would get 3 points because their book matches here. The gray area, nobody would place there, nobody would get points. The red area, white would get 2 points, nobody placed in the black area. And because the golden chalice is here in the yellow area, white would get 7 points. If multiple players were there, they would all score wherever their books were placed. Oh, something that I forgot to mention is during a scoring round, let's say that these were the cards again that were being scored. So we had nobody in gray and nobody in black. But let's say we have a player here in green. They would get this card because they're present and they're the highest ranked in that. And that would be worth an additional point. Then if we went over here to red, I just placed brown here. And let's just say we had 3 red in the pile. It would go, since brown's furthest ahead, they would get to pick a card, then then white would get to pick a card, then brown would get to pick a card. White were out of cards, they don't get to pick a second card. Brown would get an extra 2 points, and white would get an extra point. So those cards that are placed into the adventurers area are going to get redistributed when an area scores for 1 point each for each card that is collected. So then after the scoring phase, this golden chalice will get placed with the next scoring phase, and each player will have a chance to place 1 card blindly. You cannot place wild cards, it's a bad example, into the adventurers area, and then the round will continue with the person who is furthest back and it will proceed like that until players hit the next scoring. So this will go until players hit the last scoring, and then for the final scoring, and players can exceed the 75 if they want, that's fine. After the last scoring, whoever has the most points would win, and if there is a tie, whoever is the furthest back on the time track would win. All right, so that is Legends, and this is a very well-produced family game. I think that it's somewhat less exciting than it might first appear, however. Because of the way that the turn order track works, and because of the theme of, I guess, exploration or archaeology, this recalls a classic family game by the name of Thieves, which some of you might be familiar with, but I think that I definitely prefer Thebes to this game. This game, it's essentially an area control game, but just with rules stripped down so that families would be able to play it together. But I find that it's essentially going to be mostly a matter of getting lucky with the card draws. A lot of the spaces, I didn't go over every space on the board. A lot of the spaces have you drawing cards blindly from the deck, and sometimes the cards that come up in the displays where you get to choose cards are not going to be especially favorable to what you're trying to go after. So that luck of the draw is pretty high in this game, and it really affects who's going to win. Also, there's this interesting mechanism, I think, of being forced to play cards into a scoring or to trigger a scoring in the Adventurers Club versus using your cards to actually advance on a given track to score if the scoring does occur. And that seems super interesting at first, but essentially you have to do both. And even if you do both, there's no guarantee that your card's going to come up depending on how many cards are in that deck. And that's something that could be frustrating for some players as well, as I've found. It's strange, especially in a two-player game, that you only get 6 of these scoring markers, considering that there's 8 locations. That just means that it's very likely, and especially, like I said, in a two-player game, for some of these areas to go uncontested, and that's not especially interesting in an area control game. I think that maybe some rules modifications might have benefited that. It does work fine with 4 players. Essentially you won't have enough time to get to every space, but with 2 players it does play out a bit oddly, I find. Overall, this is one other thing I guess I should mention is that this board is made up of these puzzle pieces, which is fine. I don't mind that inherently, but they're all one-sided, and that seems to me like a real missed opportunity. So the board can only be assembled in one way despite the fact that it's modular, and it's not even two-sided. I think that they could have done something maybe to mix up the way that this board could be arranged, because as it is now, all of the action spaces are always going to do the exact same thing. The layout of the map is going to be exactly the same. It seems like, at the very least, if they were going to, do a modular board, they should have allowed you to change things up a little bit, just to give the game more variety, because it does seem like from my limited plays of this that every time it's going to play out roughly the same, with just your cards determining which areas you're going to go and try and score, and that's a little bit disappointing as well. So overall, there's nothing broken about this game. There's nothing that's not fun about it. It's just that it's somewhat dry, and it doesn't stack up to the game that I think that it will most readily recall for most gamers, which is Thebes. Or also Around the World in 80 Days is another game that uses this time mechanism, which I happen to prefer. So this game's perfectly fine, but it's not something that I'm thrilled about. It works, but it's not as exciting as it could be, and it seems like with a few small changes it could have been a much better game. So those are my thoughts on Legends, and thanks for watching.